Boker Tov, snowy Denver. Boker Tov. Thank you all for coming out this morning. Thank you to Saul. Thank you to Tammy, always gets me everywhere. To Yael Septi. Thank you especially to Russell Robinson. You know, one of the great needs we have in the Jewish world today is for leadership, particularly in the American Jewish community. And it's so remarkable and so rare to have a leader like Russell. Russell, you put this together in the face of great adversity and great opposition. And, I'm not a representative of the state of Israel anymore, but I say, in the name of the people of Israel, you're the best. Toda rabah. Salute you. Can we just have a moment of applause for these wonderful women and men who are out there protecting us in the cold? Really. They've done an amazing, amazing job. Really extraordinary. Boker Tov. And so who can talk about the future when our present is so bleak? And who, through all the pain and trauma of today, can think about tomorrow? And yet tomorrow, not today, was supposed to be my topic this morning. I was invited to speak to this remarkable gathering of the JNF to speak about my new book, Israel 2048, The Rejuvenated State. Now, it's published in English, Hebrew, and Arabic. It's one volume, and it's an outgrowth of a project that began one night in a conversation between myself and the Prime Minister. We were schmoozing, and he said, we never get a chance to think about tomorrow. We're so bogged down in our daily crisis, we never have long-term thinking. And I said, well, let's do a major study. Let's do a study of what we want Israel to look like on our 100th birthday, 2048. And the Prime Minister got very enthusiastic about it. Let's get it going. So we started setting up all these committees to look at social policy, foreign policy, Israel diaspora, and of course, the government fell. Whereupon, together with my good friend and my hero, Natan Sharansky, we moved the project into the Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, had a great discussion on Israel's future, and then COVID hit. And like so many of us, I retreated into my office and I began to write furiously. I wrote 22 chapters on every aspect of Israeli society, foreign policy, defense, Israel, Arabs, and of course the peace process. And the result of this book, the result was 2048, The Rejuvenated State. And what did that state look like? It was a vision. It was a vision of a state enjoying security in its borders, peace with much of the Middle East, an honored place in international affairs. It was a state with a world-class health system and social services, education, a state that balanced modernity with tradition, individual rights with national obligations, the nation-state of the Jewish people everywhere that guaranteed equal status for all of its citizens. Now, this was not a Pollyannish vision. This book is very grounded in policy. It's hard-hitting, realistic, and it's willing to address the most difficult and even potentially existential challenges facing the state of Israel. Israel 2048. What a timely book, really a timely book, at least before October 7th. Talk about getting bogged down in daily crises. Talk about it. But who can talk about the future now when hundreds of thousands of IDF reservists are away from their homes, away from their families, and desperately fighting for us right at this moment? Who can talk about the future when 137 of our brothers and sisters, our parents and children, are right now languishing in Hamas captivity? I ask myself these questions, and the only answer I have to fall back on is my training not as a diplomat or as a soldier, but as an historian. To find courage, the strength to gaze into Israel's future, we have to look back to our past. And the day I like to look back to is nearly 80 years ago, May 8th, 1945. Now, it won't be a quiz, but some of you may remember that is the day that Nazi Germany surrendered, VE Day. And the whole world was celebrating. You've seen the pictures, the parades, the fireworks, the soldiers kissing girls in Times Square. But one man wasn't celebrating, and his name was David Ben-Gurion, the leader of the Zionist movement who would become the first prime minister of the state of Israel. Now, you may not know this, but David Ben-Gurion was an avid diarist. His diaries, written in this nearly indecipherable Ben-Gurion scrawl, fill an entire archive in the south of Israel. He'd be interviewing and while he's interviewing, he'd be writing about the interview in his diary. used to drive people crazy. But on that May 8th, while the whole world rejoiced, Ben-Gurion wrote only 3 words: sad, very sad. And how can he not be sad? 1 out of every 3 Jews in the world was dead, and with them, it seemed, had died the Zionist dream. Ben-Gurion mourned, and with those words, sad, very sad, he lamented. But then he got to work. There was a state that had to be built. Homes, jobs, schools for hundreds of thousands, a homeland for the homeless, a modern army to defend them. Much of the world must have thought that the Zionist dream was dead at that moment on May 8th, 1945, but not David Ben-Gurion, not the Jewish people, decimated, but by no means defeated. Sad, but united, we were determined to come home. I can't help but wonder if Ben-Gurion were alive on October 7th, what would he have written down in his diary? Sad, very sad, or perhaps horrific and utterly nightmarish. The Nazis murdered Jews in an industrial way, knowing that even the most die-hard anti-Semites would have been discomfited by the realities of Auschwitz. The Nazis took few photographs of their butchery and were careful to cover up its evidence. Hamas, though, rejoiced in its slaughter. It streamlined it to an applauding Palestinian audience. And though terrorists massacred only 1,200 of us, does anybody doubt that? If they weren't unchecked, those terrorists would have gone on to massacre all 7 million Israeli Jews, outdistancing even the Nazis in ways that would have made even them discomfited. Horrific, nightmarish. For the terrorists not only celebrated the trauma of October 7th, they perpetuated it by taking more than 240 hostages, among them dozens of women, children, the elderly and the sick, casting them into darkness to starve. Horrific and nightmarish because the army created to ensure never again was a no-show on that morning of October 7th, and the state established to care for that wounded society was dysfunctional. And then that state had to choose between rescuing the hostages or restoring its security, between destroying Hamas and the hostages it held. Horrific, nightmarish, finally, because so much of the world failed to feel our people's pain, and some of the world actually welcomed it. The Holocaust ended in May 1945, but the conditions that created the Holocaust, the wholesale dehumanization of the Jews, thrives today on university campuses, on city streets, and in much of the media. And at such a moment, it is very natural to despair. That would be the natural response. But despondency is not an option. Not for Ben-Gurion in May 1945, and not for us today, nearly 2 months later, after October 7th. Today, we too must roll up our sleeves and get to work. We have a state to rebuild, entire communities to revitalize, schools to construct, parks to plant, cultural centers to inaugurate. We must heal the wounds and revive the faith. We must do it literally under fire as this terrible war continues. We must not despair, but on the contrary, we must seize and welcome this moment. For with every great crisis, I know this personally, for every great crisis, and this crisis is immense, comes historic opportunities. Now is the time to address many of Israel's fundamental and potentially fatal flaws. And perhaps the most threatening of these flaws is what I call the hemorrhaging of Israeli sovereignty. For 2,000 years, we Jews did not enjoy sovereignty. Then one day we woke up and found ourselves the proud owners of a sovereign country. But ownership did not equal understanding. And today Israel is indeed hemorrhaging sovereignty. And nowhere is that bleeding more evident than in a region close to JNF's heart, in the Negev. Now, the Negev represents 62% of the territory of Israel, pre-67, but Israeli sovereignty essentially ends at Beersheba. I lived in the Negev for years, and I watched it disappear under illegal Bedouin building. Now, if I build a tiny addition to my balcony, our balcony in Jaffa, I'll have the police there in a second, I'll get summons. But in the Negev, there are more than 400,000 illegal Bedouin structures, an almost unbroken belt of illegal building linking Gaza to the Hebron Hills. And in that area, there's no effective Israeli law, not against drug smuggling or gun trafficking or polygamy. The result is the world's fastest growing population. A population that once considered itself neither Palestinian nor Islamicist, but which today considers itself exactly both. Now, once we have secured our borders, we must act to restore order within them. We must put an end to illegal building, to outlaw polygamy, and to apply our sovereign laws. Now, much is being done to improve the lives of Bedouin women, but much, much more must be done. We have an opportunity to embrace the Bedouin, an esteemed part of our society, and to provide them with first-rate education, ample housing, and modern infrastructure. We must work to make them proudly, fully Israeli. The dearth of sovereignty also characterizes our relationship with a markedly different, far larger, and familial part of our society. Altogether, the ultra-Orthodox communities, and notice I say communities, not community, for they're very different, make up close to 13% of Israel's population. They are in many ways an extraordinary and admirable communities, willing to weather poverty voluntarily for what they believe. But much of Haredi life, especially the education system, lies outside of Israeli sovereignty. And in that system, thousands of Haredi children receive at most a second-grade modern education, with little or none of the math and English they need to someday enter the workforce. By 2048, demographers predict close to half of all the elementary school children in the state of Israel will be Haredi. Turning 18, they will not be able to enter the workforce, and the economy will no longer be sustainable. Here, too, important work is being done today. Prior to the war, I spent serious time visiting extraordinary Haredi institutions that are working to integrate Haredi youth into the economy. Among the most impressive is this organization called Shiluvim. It's a project in Jerusalem that trains and prepares young yeshiva students to enter into the economy. And the 16 schools of the Netzach school system, where I met Haredi students who told me of their dreams of someday joining the IDF and some days being mechanical engineers. The Netzach schools, whose visionary principal, Rabbi Menachem Baumbach, told me that the list of students waiting to get into that school was so long that he could double the number of 16 schools overnight if he only had the funding. And then came October 7th, and along with the images too horrendous to observe on other photos were the pictures of thousands of Haredim enlisting in the IDF, others supporting our soldiers, waving Israeli flags. There was a phone call I received. This is extraordinary. I got a call from one of the heads of the largest Haredi sects in Israel. I won't mention the name. He wants to talk to me. Never happened. I went to talk to him. And for an hour and a half, we sat, and he spoke with outstanding clarity. And he talked about the challenges facing us, not me, us, the state of Israel, together with the Haredim. Much is being done, and much is yet to be happening. Much is happening, but still a great deal must be done. Our goal is not to alter the Haredi way of life, but to make that life integral and productive part of Israeli life, now and in the future. Sovereignty means not only extending Israeli law over the Negev and teaching Israeli education to Haredim. Sovereignty means developing Israel's periphery, the development of towns and struggling farms, and the region close to my heart and the heart of the JNF, Hagalil, the Galilee, where I was once privileged to live as well, where my daughter lives today. Sovereignty means eliminating mortal threats, not only to the south of Israel, but in our north. For no sovereign nation on earth would sit quietly while a terrorist force, 100,000 strong, armed with 150,000 rockets, many of which can reach Eilat or Dimona, arrays openly on our northern border and proudly plans our destruction. Today, knowing what terrorists can do to our people, knowing that no wall, no matter how sophisticated, is impregnable, who will raise a family in Kiryat Shmona or in Tutula? Sovereignty, we now know, means facing up to and grappling with the threats that can make sovereignty impossible in the future. It is our sovereign duty to finish the job of destroying Hamas. And when it's done, we will continue our duty by demilitarizing Gaza, internationalizing its reconstruction, while maintaining far-reaching security control. Throughout, we will keep lurking, keep searching for a responsible Palestinian leadership that cares more about nurturing their own children than it does about massacring ours. And we will keep searching for peace, no matter how futile it sometimes feels, not falling back on long failed formulas, but exploring new ones: trusteeship, cantonment, federal solutions. Peace is a strategic and moral imperative for the sovereign Jewish state. For Israel is not only a sovereign state, there are about 190 of those in the world, but it is uniquely the Jewish state. The nation state of the Jewish people, the nation state of all the Jewish people, irrespective of how we practice our Judaism or who we vote for or don't vote for president or prime minister. The nation state of every Jew who believes that Israel has the right to exist and the right to defend that existence. And the nation state of every Jew who's being threatened or attacked because she is a Jew. For the Jewish students at Cornell and Columbia and dozens of other campuses where pro-Hamas protesters are calling for cleansing the country of Jews, Israel is your nation state. And though the mass dehumanization of Jews that enabled the Holocaust continues, the Jewish people today, we are no longer defenseless. The Jewish people today have the Jewish nation state, ready to welcome you home should you want to come home, and if you should not want to come home, then we will stand beside you. The Jewish people today, unlike the 1940s, have the might of the Israel Defense Forces. Envisioning the future, it's not easy through the grim window pane of the present. And yet, to get a glimpse of that tomorrow, we must have to look back once again to yesterday, to one day in particular, almost 3 years to the date, after that May 8th inscription in Ben-Gurion's diary, May 14th, 1948. And Ben-Gurion was at it, again, scribbling. He wrote about the massacre that occurred the night before at Gush Etzion. 125 of his defenders butchered and dismembered and sent back in pieces on British trucks. He wrote about an army with no tanks or planes and only 1 million bullets to fire at 6 Arab armies that were poised to invade. He wrote about the great many people, from the U.S. Secretary of State to half of the members of his own Zionist committee, who assured him that declaring a Jewish state that day would result in a second Holocaust. He wrote about details, large and trivial, several pages worth. But gone now was the sadness, replaced by determination and by faith. He had an army to build that would one day be, believe it or not, more than twice as large as the British and French armies combined. A democracy to create that one day would be one of the 5 democracies in the world. This is one of them: the United States, Britain, Australia, Canada, one of the 5 countries in the world never to know a second of non-democratic governance. And the only country on that list never to know a second of peace. It's an extraordinary accomplishment. Ben-Gurion had to gather refugees from 70 different nations who didn't speak the same language or share a common culture, but will one day become one of the world's most successful nation states with world-class universities, universal health care, and, what can I say, more Nobel Prizes than we have Olympic medals. Only a Jewish state would be proud of that. Look, Mom, I got an Olympic medal. No, where's your Nobel Prize? Right. Only at the end of that day's entry, May 14th, and I'm not getting it, the end of the day, May 14th, Ben-Gurion scribbled in the margins. You have to see this to believe this. Today, I quote, "Today I declared the reborn Jewish state. Today I declared the state of Israel." Today, 75 years later, we too must somehow look beyond our sadness. We have to look past our past, to our present crisis, to our future that is more secure, more prosperous, and more peaceful. We must embrace this moment of Jewish unity that has brought you all here to Denver. We must roll up our sleeves, and we must get to work. And who better to do that than the Jewish National Fund? For decades, you've been supporting the people of the Gaza envelope, and now through your Israel Resilience campaign, you're supporting them again, massively, with food, housing, and school supplies for the tens of thousands of Israelis who've been displaced, providing them with essential security, firefighting equipment, social services, trauma care, even agricultural workers to pick the fruit that will otherwise rot on the trees. Here in America and throughout the diaspora, you're helping the targets of anti-Semitism particularly on college campuses, to resist their almost daily encounters with hatred. In the face of all those vilifying Zionism as colonialist and racist, you are building a magnificent Zionist village to teach our people and the world about the beauty and the righteousness of Zionism. You are rolling up your sleeves and getting to work, just as you've done for the past 122 years. Like Ben-Gurion before you, you've determined never to succumb to despondency, no matter how dark the days seem, to build in the face of destruction, to plant where the forests have been burnt, and to strengthen the backs of those who now feel overburdened. And through it all, the wars and upheavals, the aliyot and the triumphs, you've been there, overcoming sadness, beating out the odds. And today, in the wake of the worst day to befall our people since the Holocaust, you're doing it again. Each and every one of you. You're picking up a pen, you're shouldering a shovel, forging with your faith as much as with your might a future every bit as brilliant as our past, and assuring now and into our 100th birthday and beyond that the state of and the people of Israel will live. Kfar Aza, Chai. Kibbutz Be'eri, Chai. Shderot, Chai. Well, Chai. Am Yisrael. Chai. Toda.